Imagine a mirror, right? But it's so profoundly dangerous that just the sheer act of transporting it across an ocean requires like mutiny, piracy, and this massive shadow network of international cover-ups just to keep it quiet.
Right.
Because you don't just put an object like this in a cargo hold and sail away. Today, we are looking at an artifact that doesn't just passively reflect your face. It actively digests your soul.
Yeah, and what makes this artifact so terrifying isn't just its supernatural properties. I mean, those are wild, but it's really the human ecosystem that allows it to thrive.
Yeah.
We are stepping into a world where this ancient, hungry power basically intersects with immense, unchecked human wealth.
Totally.
Talking about the merchants, the pirates, the socialites, and, the quiet observers who allow unspeakable things to operate in plain sight.
So we are taking a massive, deeply immersive journey through excerpts from the novel Royal Street. And this text builds this suffocating, intricate web of high society and criminal underworlds. And it's all centered around this dark, ancient mirror and the absolutely terrifying woman who claims it, Madame Delphine LaLaurie.
Exactly.
But to really understand how this mirror operates, we have to understand the city it arrives in. We have to set the scene for you. Usually when you read a historical novel, the city is introduced kind of gradually. You get your bearings, you learn the streets. It's like a polite courtship.
Oh, yeah. But the New Orleans of the late 1820s, exactly as it's depicted in this text, it does not do polite courtships.
No, it does not.
It basically throws you against a wall. The sensory landscape described here is a total visceral overload. It hits you all at once. And it starts with the light.
Right, the light.
It's characterized as a white gold flood of sunlight. It's not just bright, It's a dazzling, crystalline brightness that catches on whitewashed walls and polished shutters, making the French Quarter shimmer almost like a mirage. It literally makes the eye ache.
And the heat is another physical presence entirely. It's described as wearing a second garment that you never actually consented to put on.
Yes.
You walk outside, and immediately you are just wrapped in this wet, clinging, subtropical blanket. But the thing that really pulled me in the detail that honestly made the hair on my arm stand up is the smell.
The smell is so specific.
It's this cocktail of river mud, roasting coffee, the heavy sweetness of cane sugar from the refineries downriver, and beneath all of it always is the faint, dark perfume of decay. The text makes it so clear that no amount of jasmine or magnolia can ever quite deceit that underlying rock.
Which is such a brilliant structural metaphor for the entire narrative. The brilliance of the sun makes everything appear honest and open, but in this version of New Orleans, that brightness is its own kind of deception. The city uses its sensory beauty as like a defense mechanism to distract you from what's rotting underneath.
Right, and that brings us to the actual arrival of the mirror at the LaLaurie mansion. And the text doesn't treat this like a UPS delivery.
No, not at all.
It is a full-on procession. It feels like a dark coronation happening right in the middle of Royal Street, which is the epicenter of wealth in the hemisphere at this point. You've got jewelers with expensive plate glass, wine merchants stacking massive casks, the finest black ironwork framing these rosy stucco mansions. And the LaLaurie house sits right in the middle of it, projecting absolute dominance.
And the physical manifestation of that dominance is incredibly deliberate. The procession that pulls up to those black double doors, it's choreographed to match the house.
Perfectly choreographed.
First, you have this flawless black carriage, lacquered to such a high shine it almost looks blue. And inside are two men, Sighlas Duval and Armand LaVoye. Sighlas is wearing charcoal broadcloth, and he's wearing a piece of amber. He took off a dead Spaniard in 1811.
That detail is so good.
Right. That detail alone tells you he's a man of violence. He's a veteran of frontiers who wears his spoils openly. And LaVoye is younger, dressed in midnight blue, carrying this innate elegance. They've dressed like they're presenting a crown jewel to a monarch.
But I found myself fixated on what was trailing behind that carriage, because you have all this wealth and immaculate tailoring, and right behind it is the starkest contrast imaginable. It's this plain, low-sided working cart.
Yeah.
And sitting on that cart is the mirror, wrapped heavily in canvas and layers of linen. You can't even see the glass. But the text notes a psychological ripple effect on the street. People are stopping. A woman carrying a bread basket just halts. Men stop talking mid-sentence.
It's like an instinctual reaction.
Yeah, they are giving this canvas-wrapped shape, that sidelong, unwilling attention you give to a predator at the edge of your vision. They don't know what it is, but their nervous systems are firing alarm bells.
And the most profound reaction to the mirror's presence doesn't even come from the humans. It comes from the bay horse pulling the cart.
Oh, the horse scene.
The text is so specific about equine physiology here. The horse is sweating, but it's the wrong kind of sweat. It's the kind of dark, oily sweat that coats the neck of an animal when it is terrified of something it cannot physically locate and therefore cannot flee from. Its ears are pinned flat against its skull.
Right, it's just pure panic.
It's breathing heavily, fighting every instinct it has, moving forward, only because it's being physically forced by the harness.
And it refuses to calm down, even when they stop, until these two massive, quiet men, Cole Delacroix and Redden Bork, physically lift the mirror off the cart. The second that weight is removed, the horse just stops panicking. Instantly, its breathing slows, as if an invisible predator had just stepped off its back.
It's such a chilling indicator of what is inside that canvas.
Which really begs the question, right? What kind of history creates an object that makes animals sweat with blind terror? Later in the narrative, Delphine hosts a salon, and this scholar named Olivier Voss gives this massive historical breakdown of the mirror's origins. It's a dense piece of world building.
It really is. Voss establishes that the mirror originates from Murano, which is the famous glass-making island in the Venetian Republic. He goes back to the year 1291, when the Republic forcibly relocated the entire guild of glassmakers, specifically the Bellini family, to this island. The Republic declared their craft a state secret.
A literal state secret.
They gave them titles, they gave them immense wealth, but they were, for all intents and purposes, elegant hostages. They were forbidden to leave on pain of death.
I need to pause on that, because the logistics of keeping an entire family of artisans hostage for centuries is wild to me. Why not just heavily guard them in Venice proper? Why put them on an island?
Well, the official reason given in 1291 was fire hazard. Glass furnaces burning down the wooden city of Venice. But the practical reality was isolation and control. By putting them on Murano, the Venetian state could monitor the waters.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, if a glassmaker tried to defect to France or the Ottoman Empire to share the secrets of clear glass, the Venetian assassins would hunt them down. So what you have on Murano is this intense pressure cooker of obsession. The quality of a Bellini mirror was the product of 3 generations of the exact same hands, working under the exact same discipline in the exact same workshop, with no outside influence.
And that level of concentrated generational obsession leads to the theory Voss introduces from a European nobleman, Conte Rinaldo di Castelforte. Castelforte spent 20 years studying these specific Bellini mirror systems, but he wasn't just analyzing the chemical composition of the glass or the silvering process.
No, he was looking at something much deeper.
Exactly. He was studying the history of observation. He pulled from katoptromancy, which is the ancient Greek practice of divination using mirrors, and he brought in the Sufi concept of baraka.
Which is a crucial concept to understand here. Baraka is often translated as a kind of blessing or spiritual presence, but in this context, Castelforte uses it to describe the idea that certain objects can accumulate a spiritual energy or a profound gravity through sustained, intense intentionality.
See, I always thought baraka was inherently positive, though, like a holy relic accumulating grace over time. How does that map onto a mirror that clearly terrifies everything around it?
Well, Castelforte's interpretation is that the energy itself is neutral, right? It's the attention that shapes it. His conclusion is that through all of this intense claustrophobic creation on Murano, and then centuries of people staring into them with vanity, desire, or ambition, a very small number of these mirrors develop a predilection.
A predilection.
Yeah, they develop a preference. They begin to actively prefer particular kinds of attention or particular kinds of people. They stop being passive objects and start choosing their companions. The Bellini family vehemently denied this, of course, claiming they were just exceptional craftsmen. But Castelforte argued that a thing doesn't need to be intended by its creator in order to wake up.
If you think about it, the mirror is operating a lot like a modern algorithmic feed, but centuries before computers.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
We assume a mirror is just hardware, it reflects light, end of story. But Castelforte is saying this mirror is interactive. It pays attention to the person looking into it, it learns what its user desires, it absorbs that psychological data, and it actively feeds it back to them, shaping their reality. It's an algorithm that runs on human soul instead of code. It wants engagement.
And that framing perfectly explains the supernatural evidence provided by the men who transported it. Because when Cole and Redden are finally standing in Madame LaLaurie's immaculate entrance hall, terrified to even look at the shape they just carried, they debrief Sighlas and Armand on what actually happened aboard the ship, the Providence. Redden calls the mirror a duppy glass.
Right, and he clarifies what a duppy is. He says, where we come from, a ducky is a spirit. not a ghost, something that remains, something that has been held or given reason to stay. And he brings up the spiritual mechanics of his belief system. He talks about Papa Legba.
Yeah, the guardian spirit.
Exactly, the guardian spirit who stands at the crossroads between the physical world and the spiritual world. In a natural spiritual order, nothing crosses that threshold without Papa Legba's permission. You have to ask, you have to pay a toll. But Redden says this glass bypasses all of that entirely. It is an unauthorized tear in the fabric. It just feeds on whatever happens to pass near it.
And listen to how Redden describes the physical sensation of being near the canvas. He says it feels like someone is standing too close behind you, right in your blind spot. And when you turn around, there is no one there. Only there is.
Creepy.
And the physical evidence on the Providence confirms that this isn't just sailors getting spooked by a legend. The captain of the ship had a pet monkey that had been at sea for years. This animal knew the ship inside and out, had no fear of storms, no fear of the dark hold. But the night they brought the mirror aboard, the monkey screamed.
A scream of understanding.
Yes. The text specifies it wasn't the scream of a startled animal. It was the scream of a creature that suddenly understands something horrifying. And then it vanished.
Not died, vanished. And it wasn't just the wildlife, right? The environment itself warped around the cargo. Cole is an incredibly pragmatic, seasoned sailor. He doesn't strike me as someone prone to exaggeration, but he describes the weather acting in ways weather shouldn't. A storm came from the wrong quarter, out of perfectly clear water, and then it didn't pass. Cole says weather finishes, it blows over. This weather just stopped, like it was making a point. It held them there.
And then there's the human toll, which is the most devastating part. Captain Hawthorne and the pirate Ventresca both spent time standing in front of the mirror, and both of them lost time. They emerged looking like men whose bodies went somewhere their minds didn't. They were hollowed out.
I'm still stuck on the logistics, though. A cursed piece of Murano glass that breaks the minds of sea captains and stops the weather doesn't just get delivered to a parlor on Royal Street by mistake. Someone has to facilitate that. You don't order a dumpy glass from a catalog. Delphine couldn't have managed the maritime logistics of this herself.
She couldn't. Moving an artifact of this magnitude, especially one that leaves a trail of psychological destruction in its wake, requires a deeply compromised, highly sophisticated logistical network. It requires an entire human system of enablers who are willing to look the other way for the right price. And that brings us to the men pulling the strings in the shadows.
Sighlas, Duval, and Armand LaVoye.
Yes.
Let's look at this network of complicity. So Sighlas and Armand are sitting with Delphine in her gorgeous sunlit courtyard right after the delivery. They're sipping coffee out of fine china. And the conversation turns to Jean-Louis LaLaurie, Delphine's late husband. The text gives us this crucial piece of political philosophy. It notes that Jean-Louis understood a fundamental truth about New Orleans, the official commerce of the city, like the governors and the legitimate shipping lines, and the unofficial illegal economy of smugglers and pirates were not separate entities. They were expressions of the exact same root system.
And if they're the same root system, Sighlas Duval is the master gardener. In Chapter 7, the narrative gives us access to Sighlas's internal monologue, and it is a masterclass in ruthless bureaucratic pragmatism. We finally learn the full story of the mutiny on the Providence.
The mutiny, right.
The ship was taken by a pirate named Ventresca. Ventresca is part of Sighlas's broader unofficial network, so he operates with Sighlas's tacit approval. But Ventresca made a massive, almost fatal error in judgment regarding the mirror.
Because Hawthorne, the original legitimate captain of the Providence, was unraveling. The mirror had broken him. He was making erratic statements to his crew, making it abundantly clear that the moment he hit a port, he was going to talk about the unnatural nightmare in the cargo hold. So Ventresca, acting like a practical pirate dealing with a liability, stages a mutiny and maroons Hawthorne on an isolated island in the Atlantic. He figures, out of sight, out of mind, the ocean will solve the problem.
It seems like a standard pirate solution, but it fails to account for the political reality of the victim. Hawthorne isn't just a random, expendable sailor. He has deep ties to naval interests in Washington and London. And because he hasn't returned, those powerful people are starting to make quiet inquiries.
And inquiries are dangerous.
Very. Sighlas, sitting in his mahogany office, understands the precise political temperature of the city. He knows the difference between an inquiry and an alarm. An inquiry means action is being considered, but an alarm means the fleet is already sailing. He calculates he has perhaps 2 months to fix Ventresca's mess before international naval powers descend on New Orleans and uproot his entire black market operation.
So how does a 19th century shadow broker handle a crisis like this? He acts exactly like a modern corporate crisis management firm. My first thought was, well, why doesn't Sighlas just send an assassin to the island to finish the job? Dead men tell no tales.
Because an assassination of a connected captain invites a formal investigation. A disappearance is a mystery, but a murder is a crime that demands a culprit. Sighlas realizes that brute force won't work, and simple bribery isn't enough for a man with Hawthorne's connections and trauma. Sighlas has to change Hawthorne's incentives.
It is so cynical and brilliant. Sighlas decides to give Hawthorne a new ship. He commissions Cole and Redden to take a fast Baltimore clipper, the Marguerite St. Clair, sail to the Atlantic island, retrieve Hawthorne, and offer him command of a new vessel and a lucrative place in the very network that marooned him. Give a captain a ship, and you give him back his identity and his power.
It's a golden parachute.
It really is. It's a golden parachute wrapped in an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. Sighlas is making Hawthorne's silence a matter of self-interest and career survival, rather than fear.
And furthermore, the choice of personnel is pure psychological manipulation. Sighlas specifically sends Cole because Cole was a member of the Providence crew. Cole witnessed the marooning and carries the heavy guilt of not intervening. Sighlas weaponizes Cole's own morality.
That is so dark.
He knows Hawthorne will be more likely to trust Cole, and he knows Cole will work twice as hard to negotiate the peace because he has personal skin in the game. Sighlas doesn't just manage logistics, he manages human guilt.
But no matter how smart Sighlas is, he can't control everyone. While Sighlas is plotting in his office, the text introduces us to the ultimate counterweight to his secrecy, this 75-year-old former corsair named Jean Boze. Boze is fascinating. He survived the Haitian Revolution, he's seen empires fall, and now he lives in New Orleans with a very specific daily discipline. He just walks the waterfront every single morning.
Boze operates on a specific philosophy, which is that a port is a city's nervous system. If you want to know what a city is truly thinking, you don't listen to the politicians and the cabildos, and you don't listen to the gossip in the salons. You put your hand on the pulse where the water meets the land. Boze is the embodiment of the historical record. He maintains 11 volumes of diaries.
11 volumes.
And his methodology is vital. He records facts in physical proximity to one another without rushing to a premature conclusion. He lets the data assemble itself.
I was initially reading Boze as just a neighborhood busybody, like a guy with too much time on his hands spying on the docks. But the text elevates him to a masterclass in observation. He's watching the Marguerite St. Clair being provisioned for a deep-water voyage. He notes the massive amounts of salted pork in water casks. He sees Cole and Redden boarding it. Now, Boze already knows the Providence arrived weeks ago without its captain, and he knows unlisted, heavy cargo was moved in the dead of night to the LaLaurie mansion.
Right, and he understands the sociological rules of his era perfectly. He knows Cole cannot be the captain of the Marguerite St. Clair because Cole is a free man of color. Boze notes this injustice as merely one of the arrangements of the world he observes, without editorializing in his diary. But because he knows Cole isn't the captain, he focuses on Cole's demeanor. He zeroes in on Cole's face on the dock, and Boze writes that it is not the look of a man undertaking a new, exciting venture. It is the heavy, burdened look of a man returning to unfinished business.
Boze sees the entire web without even knowing what the spider looks like yet. He connects the missing captain, the secret cargo, the fast ship, and the quiet inquiries from Washington. He represents the terrifying threat of the written word to people like Sighlas. But if the docks are the city's nervous system, catching all these signals, then Madame LaLaurie's mansion on Royal Street is its dark, beating heart. Let's move inside the house.
The transition from the chaotic sensory assault of the New Orleans streets into the interior of the LaLaurie mansion is deeply jarring. The text describes the interior as a cultivated dominion. The moment you step through those doors, the air temperature drops. It smells of citrus oil and impossibly fresh, expensive flowers. The floors are laid with black and white diamond marble, and the geometry is so precise you can feel the weight of intention beneath every single step.
And that intention belongs entirely to Delphine. But the detail that truly unnerved me wasn't the lavish decor, it was the servants. You expect a busy household to have noise. But the enslaved people moving through these halls operate in an unnatural, suffocating silence. The text says they have learned to make themselves less present than they are. They physically try to take up less space, breathe quieter, draw absolutely zero attention to themselves. It is a house managed by sheer atmospheric terror, disguised as perfect aristocratic order.
To understand the house, we have to analyze Delphine herself. She is 43 years old in the text. Her beauty is described in a very specific, unsettling way. It hasn't softened with age, it is concentrated. The author compares it to liquor when you cook off the water. What's left is more potent, volatile, and essentially itself. She is the ultimate micromanager of reality. When Sighlas and Armand are sitting with her, she plays the role of the gracious host flawlessly. She serves them coffee, she smiles, she performs intimacy and equality.
It's a mask, but it's a mask made of titanium. And the text brilliantly highlights her control by showing us the psychological damage of the people who have to live with her. Look at her husband, Leonard. He is a physician, a man of science who should be dedicated to observing reality. Yet he exists in a state of deliberate, active blindness. He sits at his beautifully appointed breakfast table, reading his medical journals, willfully choosing not to investigate the strange, heavy dragging sounds coming from the ceiling above him.
He just ignores it.
He accepts whatever placating explanation she gives him because confronting the reality of his wife is far more dangerous than living in a comfortable lie.
Leonard's cowardice is despicable, but the plight of her 17-year-old daughter, Pauline, is heartbreaking. Pauline wears a physical brace for her back, hidden beneath her expensive dresses. But the brace is almost a metaphor for her entire psychological existence. She maintains a rigid, composed posture that the text explicitly calls a survival skill. When Pauline is in a room with her mother, she is constantly taking inventory, calculating the exact emotional and physical geometry required to avoid triggering Delphine's wrath. The LaLaurie household isn't a family, it's a hostage situation with excellent silverware.
And the awful reality of what Leonard and Pauline are ignoring is fully exposed in Chapter 9 when we follow Delphine up into the attic. I don't want to just gloss over this because the sensory shift is horrific. Downstairs is citrus and marble, but as she climbs, the wooden stairs literally groan under the weight of the suffering above. The smell hits you before you see anything: damp wood, iron, and stale sweat. There are chains bolted to the load-bearing beams. Some of those chains end in stillness, others do not.
The physical horror is profound. But the true terror of that scene lies in Delphine's demeanor. A lesser writer would have her enter the attic screaming, acting like a deranged berserker. But Delphine walks in with the calm efficiency of a floor manager checking inventory.
That's exactly what it feels like.
She speaks in a modulated, practiced voice. She says things like, "Continue as you were instructed," and "Do not test the limits of my patience again." She doesn't want silence from her victims. She wants managed silence. She wants them to suffer, but within the strict parameters she dictates.
If you think about it, the house is basically a high-end luxury vehicle. It looks flawless on the outside, the leather is immaculate, the engine hums perfectly, but you look under the hood and the engine is running entirely on human suffering. Delphine is the driver, and this is the crucial realization about the supernatural element of the story. Delphine doesn't use the mirror to become evil. She is already a master of absolute psychopathic control. The mirror didn't corrupt an innocent woman. It found its perfect apex practitioner.
That is a vital distinction. The tragedy here is fundamentally human before it ever becomes supernatural. And the reason she has been able to operate this human engine of suffering for so long is because of the social complicity of the city, represented by figures like Celeste Fontenay-Devereux.
Oh, Celeste.
Celeste is described as the indispensable social keystone of New Orleans. She curates the guest lists, she manages the salons, she knows where the bodies are buried, sometimes literally. She dictates the social climate.
When Celeste attends Delphine's salon, they have this fascinating interaction. Delphine actually feels something she rarely feels regarding another person recognition. The text describes Delphine sensing Celeste's true nature as an intelligence that moves through a room like a current through water. Invisible, completely purposeful. Celeste has an appetite for power that is so well managed, polite society mistakes it for grace.
They recognize each other as fellow apex predators. They both use social standing, wealth, and manners to exert control over the city. Celeste, and by extension the rest of the high society guests, know what goes on in that house. Or at the very least, they suspect enough to ask questions they deliberately choose not to ask. But they attend the salons anyway. They compliment the music, they drink her wine. The wealth and social standing create an impenetrable shield of invisibility.
So the terrifying question becomes, what happens when you take a woman who is already obsessed with absolute control, who is completely shielded by the highest echelons of society, and you merge her consciousness with a hungry, ancient, supernatural artifact?
We get to see that horrifying evolution in how the mirror awakens to her. Delphine places the mirror in her private, locked reading room. The first interaction is incredibly subtle. She looks into the glass and notices a fractional lag in her reflection. Just the fraction of a heartbeat where the glass is deciding whether or not to show her face. It is testing her resolve. Most people would run from a mirror that disobeys physics. Delphine leans in. The word that arrives in her mind isn't fear. The word is magic. But she doesn't think of it as a fairy tale. She thinks of it as a flat, clinical diagnosis of a new tool at her disposal.
She starts experimenting with it. She realizes the mirror allows her to extend her awareness beyond her physical senses. She thinks of her daughter Pauline sleeping 2 floors above her, and suddenly Delphine can feel her daughter's sleep. The text describes it as a slow, oceanic rhythm. The mirror is actively absorbing Delphine's desire for omniscience and giving her new, terrifying capacities. She is learning how to breach the threshold. And this leads to one of the most chilling psychological sequences I've ever read, involving her neighbors across the street, the Leclercs.
Philippe and Marguerite Leclerc serve as the moral conscience of Royal Street. Marguerite is in her courtyard cutting roses when she looks up and witnesses an atrocity. An enslaved child, described as no older than 12, is running frantically along the roofline of the LaLaurie mansion. Delphine is pursuing her. The child, in absolute terror, falls from the roof to her death in the courtyard below. Marguerite is traumatized. She tells her husband, Philippe, who believes in the civic order. He does what a good citizen is supposed to do. He writes a formal letter reporting the death to the municipal court.
He trusts the system. He raises the matter through the proper channels. And initially, the system seems to respond. A municipal court warrant is issued and served to Delphine by a Lieutenant Marchand. But the text brutally exposes the justice system as a fragile, performative farce when it goes up against real wealth.
Totally performative.
Delphine receives the police lieutenant with delicate, unhurried grace. She isn't intimidated. She tells him it is simply procedure and promises to attend court, projecting this aura that makes the lieutenant feel like he's apologizing to her for doing his job. She knows she is untouchable.
Henri Beaumont, a pragmatic friend of the Leclercs, tries to warn Philippe about exactly this dynamic. He tells Philippe, "You have put yourself on record against a woman who has never been held to account for anything in her life." Henri advises them to document everything and send copies outside the city limits, because Delphine is not a woman who accepts being observed or challenged. She requires total uncontested control of her narrative, and the Leclercs just threatened that control.
And Delphine decides to teach them a lesson. She doesn't send thugs to beat up Philippe. She goes to her locked room, sits in front of the mirror in the dead of night, and fully projects her awareness outside her physical body. She crosses Royal Street as an astral presence and enters the Leclerc home. The text describes her feeling the atmosphere of their house, the smell of beeswax, lavender, the good, orderly warmth, the home that doesn't run on violence, and she absolutely despises it.
It is an act of pure astral intimidation. She navigates the house until she locates Marguerite lying awake in bed, consumed by anxiety over what she witnessed. Delphine can feel the very texture of Marguerite's fear, and to assert ultimate dominance, Delphine physically reaches across the ethereal boundary and moves a brass candlestick on Marguerite's bedside table. She moves it just an inch, just enough to make the brass scrape against the wood. Marguerite freezes in terror. Then Delphine moves it back. Satisfied, she floats downstairs to Philippe's study, where he is working late, and she lifts the corner of the topmost page on his desk right in front of his eyes.
I have to say, this is where the story shifts from a historical thriller into straight-up psychological warfare. If Delphine had acted like a traditional poltergeist, throwing dishes against the wall, shattering windows, screaming, it would be scary, sure. But moving a candlestick an inch is so much worse.
It's so subtle.
It's a sniper putting a red laser dot right on the center of your chest, holding it there for 3 seconds and turning it off. She isn't trying to kill them. She's trying to let them know that she can. It is a targeted, intimate violation of their safest spaces. She is sending a message. I am in your bedroom. Your walls are caper to me. The law cannot protect you.
The psychological impact is immediate. Marguerite and Philippe meet in the study. Marguerite is holding her candle with both hands, shaking, and she simply says, she knows. Philippe, looking at the papers that just moved on their own, has this moment of grim realization. He says, we're not going to stop. You have to admire their bravery. They are entirely outmatched. They are fighting a woman who has the full backing of societal wealth, a corrupt legal system, and now an ancient supernatural entity.
It feels hopeless for them. But there is one power in New Orleans that operates entirely outside of high society's wealth, completely ignores the municipal court's performative warrants, and understands the supernatural better than anyone. Let's move to our final section and discuss the counterforce. Marie Laveau.
The introduction of Marie Laveau is a masterstroke of understated writing. The author doesn't introduce her performing a grand ritual in a moonlit swamp. We meet Marie operating in her mundane economic guise as a hairdresser, attending to Celeste Fontenot and her wealthy friends in a sunlit parlor in the Garden District.
It's a brilliant scene because it highlights the intimacy of her access. She arrives with her basket of combs, pomades, and oils. The physical act of doing someone's hair requires them to let their guard down, to literally bow their heads to her. Immediately, she makes every woman in that room feel in good hands. She is intensely observant. She tells Odette a specific remedy for her mother's aching knee. She looks at Marguerite, sees the exhaustion, and promises her a remedy that will taste like swamp water, but commands her to drink it anyway. She provides this intense, maternal, yet utterly commanding attention.
And while she is methodically styling Celeste's hair, Marie imparts a profound philosophy of power under the guise of local gossip. She tells a story about a woman over on Chartres Street who was burning red St. Expedite candles, attempting to ruin a neighbor's marriage out of spite. But the woman kept blowing the candles out halfway through the burn. Marie pauses her work and says, "You cannot ask for something and then keep interrupting the asking." Halfway tells the world you don't believe in your own request.
You commit or you don't. Halfway is worse than nothing. I love that line. It's a masterclass in the mechanics of intention. You can't dabble in power, you know. You have to own the consequences of what you ask for. Marguerite, who has been agonizing over whether she did the right thing by reporting the falling child and bringing the supernatural retaliation down on her home, takes this to heart. She asks Marie a very direct, vulnerable question. She asks if feeling the spirits, working with them, is like prayer.
Marie's response to Marguerite is the ultimate philosophical pushback against the complicity of the entire city. Marie stops, looks Marguerite in the eye, and asks, "When you pray, does someone answer?" Marguerite, being a devout woman, says she believes so, and Marie replies, "The difference is I don't pretend I don't hear the answer."
That is radical accountability. Marie owns her power and her connection to the spiritual world fully. She acknowledges the ugly realities of the moral world. Contrast that with polite society. You have Leonard LaLaurie reading his medical journal, pretending he doesn't hear the chains upstairs. You have the guests at the salon drinking wine, pretending they don't know where the wealth comes from. The entire city blows their candles out halfway. Marie operates with absolute unflinching conviction.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the climax of our source text. Marie is walking down Royal Street in the heat of the afternoon. The visual contrast is striking. She is dressed entirely in white. A pristine white turban, white gloves, a white parasol. The text notes that the people on the street instinctively defer to her. The crowds part. The city moves around her like water around a stone in a river. But as she approaches the block where the LaLaurie mansion sits, her pace noticeably slows.
She feels the house before she truly sees it. She senses the spiritual weight of it. And she recognizes that the darkness radiating from those rosy stucco walls isn't just human cruelty. Marie knows the smell and feel of human suffering. New Orleans is built on it, and she navigates it every day. But this specific energy feels attentive. It feels hungry in a colder, far more ancient way. She stops on the cobblestones, tilts her white parasol back, and looks up at the second-floor windows. And there, hiding in the shadows behind the polished shutters, looking down at the street, is Delphine LaLaurie.
The author gives us a silent showdown between two absolute apex predators. You have Delphine shrouded in the darkness of her locked room and Marie standing in the blinding white gold sunlight of the street. Neither of them speaks, neither of them waves. Marie does not show an ounce of deference. She simply inclines her head, a microscopic nod. It's an acknowledgement of the threat. The text beautifully describes Marie's internal state, noting that behind her eyes, old prayers and older warnings had begun quietly turning themselves over like cards on a table.
Marie recognizes instantly that the mirror isn't just a cursed object sitting passively in a reading room. It is an active, highly intelligent threat that has fully awakened in her city, and it has successfully merged with the most dangerous, controlling human being in New Orleans. The shutter clicks closed, a carriage rattles by, breaking the silence. But the lines of war have been drawn.
So as we step back and synthesize everything we've explored in this deep dive, what this text ultimately provides is a meticulous, devastating anatomy of evil. It strips away the myth that true horror exists in a vacuum or comes solely from a supernatural bogeyman, Horror requires infrastructure. It
Absolutely.
requires the absolute silence of polite society. It requires the logistical, pragmatic support of the criminal underworld, the Sighlas Duvals, who smooth out the messy edges of atrocity so commerce can flow. It
Hmm.
requires the willful blindness of the law, the Leonards who read their books, and the neighbors who pull their curtains shut. The mirror is a terrifying supernatural catalyst, yes, but the tragedy, the grinding machinery of it all, is fundamentally structurally human.
It really forces you to examine the world around you. What are the attics in our own modern societies that we politely ignore while we enjoy the salon downstairs? Because the uncomfortable truth of this text is that we all exist in networks of complicity, whether we have the courage to admit it or not. The lingering question is, when you see the horror, are you the Leclerc, terrified but desperately trying to speak up and force the system to work? Or are you the guests at the party, admiring the crystal chandelier, sipping the wine, and pretending you don't hear the floorboards groaning above your head?
It's a profound question of personal and civic responsibility. And it brings us to one final, deeply unsettling thought to leave you with, circling back to Count Castelforte's theory of predilection.
The theory that the mirror learns from the attention it receives, that it feeds on the specific desires and psychology of its owner.
Precisely. Think about the mirror's history. It spent centuries in the elegant, cloistered palaces of Venice, surrounded by artisans, vanity, and political intrigue. It spent weeks in the damp holds of pirate ships, absorbing the primal, chaotic fear of broken sailors and mutineers. It has always learned from its environment. But now it is locked in a small, quiet room with Madame Delphine LaLaurie. It is feeding exclusively on a mind characterized by absolute psychopathic control, meticulous cruelty, and an insatiable desire to dominate reality.
Wow. I hadn't thought about it from the mirror's perspective.
The question you have to ask yourself as we close this book is, what exactly is the mirror learning from Delphine? What will this ancient hungry artifact become when it is finished digesting the soul of a monster?
That is a terrifying thought to end on. It's like the mirror spent centuries looking for the perfect teacher, and it finally found her. And it all happens right there on Royal Street where the sunlight pours over the city, the coffee roasts, and the beautiful poisonous flower just keeps blooming.